Thank you, sir. We all know like what happened in Afghanistan last year, and last month the Taliban regime has completed 1 year, and still no country has officially recognized its rule. Regarding this, I have like two questions. One, a rushed US exit from Afghanistan with the help of Pakistan and the return of a hardline Islamic Sharia based government in power. Do you think Pakistan will use Afghanistan soil to plot terrorists more freely? And second is, in one of your articles, you said, and I quote, that the course of events in Afghanistan since August 2021 have led India to adopt a flexible and pragmatic approach to the country. Can you explain this flexible and pragmatic approach that you have mentioned?
So first of all, about the terrorism scenario in Afghanistan, I think it's important to know that Pakistan is currently grey-listed by the Financial Action Task Force. So that means that whatever action Pakistan undertakes in support of any terrorist group or any terrorist movement will come under the scrutiny of the FATF, and that in a sense risks more punitive measures against Pakistan. And in that sense, Afghanistan actually, in a sense, provides the necessary, what should I say, diversion for Pakistan, because Pakistan can actually divert some of the terrorist groups based on soil to Afghanistan, and we have seen that constantly in the on the ground reports which are coming from the UN sanctions monitoring team in Afghanistan, which has noted for a very long time that Pakistan headquarters anti-India terrorist groups such as Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed have actually taken shelter in Afghanistan in close proximity with Al Qaeda and the Haqqani network, especially in Nangarhar and Kunar province. So that just shows, that Pakistan is actually, as you said, plowing some of the terrorists into Afghanistan. Now, India has highlighted that possibility of Afghanistan again emerging as a terrorist safe haven. In fact, one of the first meetings which India had with the Taliban officials, this issue actually came up, and this issue was highlighted by the Indian diplomats that they do not want Afghanistan to emerge as a terrorist safe haven as it was when it was under the previously under the Taliban rule. Now, looking at that approach of India, I think in a sense I would say it's a very nuanced approach that without giving the due recognition to the Taliban regime in power, because we still consider it as a terrorist group, and the fact is that even the Taliban cabinet, the interim cabinet, so-called interim cabinet, has many United Nations designated terrorists in that particular cabinet. So we do not recognize that Taliban government, and if you look at again other external stakeholders, many of the external stakeholders, including Pakistan, have also not recognized this particular regime. But at the same time, given the history of India's engagement in Afghanistan over the last 2 decades, since the U.S. Military operations began in Afghanistan after the 9/11 attacks, we had always focused on the humanitarian assistance part. Now, that meant that we had to, in a sense, there was that critical gap which had emerged after the fall of the Ashraf Ghani government and the emergence of Taliban and the return of Taliban to Kabul, that suddenly with the exit of the United States and many of the foreign donors, Afghanistan's humanitarian crisis was getting worsened. So they needed food, they needed access to some of the basic medical facilities and those kind of things. And I think India has capitalized on that, that without recognizing the Taliban regime, we have shown our readiness to provide humanitarian assistance to the Afghan people. And we have seen that in the form of the provision of the COVID-19 vaccines to the Afghan civilians, as well as the food aid which India has sent to Kabul. And that, I think, in a sense, is what I'm trying to say, that India has had this nuanced approach that, in a sense, it wants to it wants to demonstrate that that it opposes the Taliban regime, but it does not oppose the Afghan civilians or the Afghan population as such, and therefore it is trying to work out this way of working with with some of the aid agencies which are still on the ground, and ensure that some of the needs of the Afghan civilians are met, which is also the reason why India has also decided to reopen the embassy in Kabul, even with the minimal staff, because we want to ensure that we can give some of the emergency visas for the Afghan nationals who want to travel to India for medical, education, and those kind of things. And mind you, this humanitarian assistance not just is on the Afghan territory; it's also on the Indian side. For instance, at the time of the fall of Kabul to Taliban, we had some of the Afghan military candidates undergoing training here at some of the Indian military academies. Now, once they completed training, they were hesitant to go back to Afghanistan. So India has actually absorbed many of these cadets and given them another training program so that they can remain on the Indian soil for some time, and till the time actually the situation in Afghanistan stabilizes. So that is how India has, in a sense, worked out a very nuanced approach in the last 1 year that the Taliban has come back to Kabul.
So since we have been talking about India's and Afghan policy and terrorist outfits emerging out of Pakistan, I would also like to highlight some internal security issues. And this is a question it's a follow-up question to the previous question. The recent targeted killings of civilians and attacks on security personnel have raised concerns in the security fraternity. However, the numbers show otherwise. I would like to know from you what is the status of security apparatus in Jammu and Kashmir and how the government is strategizing and dealing with cross-border militant infiltration as well.
So I would actually say that this is actually one of the best time to visit Kashmir and see the situation by yourself, because in the last 3 years, the security situation in Kashmir has improved dramatically. So as I said, that some of the offshoots which are operating there, the Lashkar, some of the offshoots of the pan-Islamic terrorist groups such as the Al Qaeda and the Islamic State, they have their local franchises operating in the Kashmir Valley, and we also have the Pakistan-based groups such as the Hizbul Mujahideen, LET, and JEM. They're also operating, but their ability to actually carry out terrorist violence has considerably reduced. So after the suicide attack on the CRPF convoy in Pulwama in February 2019, we have not seen a major attack being carried out by these terrorist groups, which again is a testimony to the crackdown by the security forces, which have diminished their capability as well as the top leadership of these groups to engage into any kind of terrorist violence, which is why they have been now reduced to carry out these random acts of targeted violence, targeting the religious minorities, the laborers, the outside laborers, the Sikhs, and those sections which are actually not exactly in a sense, what should I say, they're not secure targets, right? So they remain vulnerable to the terrorist violence, and the terrorist groups actually are finding the right opportunity to just go and target them. That does not need any kind of planning. That does not need any kind of prior surveillance. So that is now what the terrorist groups are reduced to. That from the heydays of the terrorist violence, they are actually now reduced to carrying out these random acts of violence, which surely gives them some kind of publicity. But in the longer run, it actually weakens their cause, because now even some of the local Kashmiris are actually accusing these groups of, disturbing the peace in the Kashmir Valley, which has now become, in a sense, a prevalent situation in the last 3 years. Even on the infiltration front, we have seen a consistent to fall in the infiltration figures, and that's because of the three-tiered counter-infiltration grid which India has raised in the last 10 years. So we have the first tier of the Indian Army, the second tier of the paramilitary, such as the CRPF or the Border Security Force, and the third pillar of the local Jammu and Kashmir police. So any terrorist who tries to infiltrate into the Kashmir Valley has to pass these three tiers, but in trying to do so, he actually gets eliminated by one of the by one of the tiers. So that, in a sense, has also affected the infiltration happening from the line of control and on the international border. And last year, the Taliban's return, in a sense, provided some kind of a temporary momentum to these groups. And it was expected that probably they will engage in more violence, but that has proved just that, a temporary momentum. So after the euphoria over the return of Taliban settled down, these groups, were back to doing these random acts and not really exactly engage in major kind of violence. Uh, Having said that, I think one concern which remains for the Indian security, or two concerns which remain for the Indian security forces. One is the radicalization, and I think that will involve a longer term work in terms of countering, how the youth want to undertake the path of violence and therefore get radicalized by social media and some of the material which comes from the religious seminaries. Uh, and second is the challenge of the anti-India propaganda carried out by Pakistan. And countering that kind of propaganda requires a national effort. So even the security forces in the valley are undertaking an effort to create an alternate narrative and countering that litany of lies coming from Pakistan. Actually, that effort needs to be should I say amplified nationally so that we can defeat this information warfare which is coming from Pakistan side.
Rightly said, sir. I completely agree. And we often hear about like dark web or dark net. So this brings me to my next question. That physical cross-border militant infiltration is just one part of modern terrorism. Terrorist outfits have devised new and more advances strategies for procurement of arms, sales of narcotics, and currency transfers with the help of darknet. Websites like the Onion Router, Toshka, and Empire have been a menace to cybersecurity. As these websites are anonymous and bypass government surveillance, so I would like to know from you what you think should be India's approach to tackling darknet porn threats.
So, as I said, in the darknet by nature is anonymous and encrypted. So first thing that we will actually need to require is to train the security forces and the law and order machinery to to first of all know about the phenomenon, because one of the first things that we see when it comes to darknet is just the absence of awareness about that this kind of internet exists and this kind of internet is accessible by millions of people and millions of Indians who actually engage in all sorts of nefarious activities. So first, the thing that we will need to do is the training of the police and the security forces, and some of the states are actually leading effort on that, and so are the intelligence agencies, which have now realized that these kind of activities are happening. The second is to actually upgrade our forensic capability. Again, that is something which is a work in progress. So in the last few months, the Ministry of Home Affairs has announced a significant upgrading of India's cyber forensics capability. So the aim is to actually open one major cyber forensic facility in every state capital. So that at least that every state capital gets that kind of facility, which in a sense will help them to access this kind of material and ensure that they're able to interdict some of these activities there. And the third that thing that India will need to do is the 90% of the activities in the darknet are related to the drug smuggling. So, which means that even though the buying and selling of the drugs may happen on the darknet, the actual delivery happens physically, which means that we will need to ensure that the Narcotics Control Bureau can actually go back to the darknet and see what kind of activities which are happening, and then link it to the physical activities which are happening on the ground, so that it can interdict those drug consignments. Again, that is something which the Narcotics Control Bureau has realized, and we are seeing now in the last few years a gradual rise in cases of the consignments which are being sold on the darknet but being interacted by the Narcotics Control Bureau, which means that they're able to link those things with what is happening on the darknet.
Thank you, sir, for this insight. This brings me to the last question of the session, that how will the technological competence of the world shape international geopolitics over the next few decades?
So there's a very, I would say, a very simple answer to that, which is basically that technology is actually becoming the is becoming the primary factor in shaping the alliances now. So if you see, for instance, Quad is actually, maybe a collaboration of the democracy, but it is actually what we call as a collaboration of techno-democracies. Techno-democracies means liberal democracies which are leading economies, but also have an advanced tech sector. And if you look at India, US, Russia, Japan, and Australia, each can be considered a techno-democracy in its own right. So that is something which is now going to define the geopolitical alignments. We already saw that, for instance, in the proposal which was brought up by the former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who spoke about the D10, that democracy 10, that basically meant that that democracies of the world need to come together to collaborate on some of the emerging technologies such as 5G and avoid the kind of disruptions which may cause because of our overdependence on single sources. In this case, it would be China. So that is something which, in a sense, is going to define the contemporary geopolitics. And if you see on the other side, that's also true. For instance, Russia and China are today coming together to collaborate on some of the emerging technologies. President Putin has already said that anyone who controls the artificial intelligence will rule the world. So, which means that they are also looking at some of these emerging technologies to solidify their lead. And the fact is that today there is the kind of R&D which used to happen especially in the West, especially in the United States, on some of these emerging technologies. The US is actually losing that particular competitive advantage, because over the years there has been what should I say, a reduction in funding which goes into the R&D, and consequently what we have seen is that as I mentioned, one is Russia and China trying to take the lead on this, but also the private sector. So today, for instance, quantum computing, right? Quantum computing is where the US private sector is much more advanced than the actual the US defense industry, and that just shows that unless you do a sustained effort in doing this R&D on some of these emerging technologies, you will not be able to achieve that expertise. And again, the sheer scale of tech advancement means that if you do it on your own, it will be difficult for you to bridge that gap, which is why, for instance, China and Russia are coming together. So, which is why, for instance, the people on the other side are saying, the democracies need to come together so that we can pull in the resources. Now, with COVID-19, what has happened is that that many of the national economies have undergone strain. So there is a challenge of resource mobilization also. So in this case, if all the democracies come together, pool their resources, they will be able to do a job better than actually doing it on their own, and therefore losing that competition. So I think technology is going to define international relations in the coming decades together.
Rightly said, sir. And thank you so much for this wonderful and insightful session. And thank you for sharing your thoughts on cybersecurity and national security. It was an honor to have you, and it was my honor to interview you. Thank you so much, and thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
And we're looking for more collaborations in near future.